If you haven't read the book, Enlightenment Now, it just came out a few months ago. It is worth reading. Steven Pinker is one of my favorite authors, but he really tackles the challenge of progress. And he uses the world of science to make this case. And part of one of the things he says is, progress is not guaranteed. If you look at progress in science, if you look at how we have leveraged science post-Enlightenment, we have made amazing strides in things like life expectancy, global hunger, child mortality, global health, inequality, crime, and war. But if you listen to how people talk about our world today, they act as though it's the worst as it's ever been, right? And the challenge with that, just take something like poverty, right? Just little facts, like in the early 1800s, depending on how you define extreme poverty, and they're defining it as the equivalent of living on today's money of $1 a day, almost 85 to 90% of the world lived in extreme poverty. History was written by the elite 10% that was actually living the life, and the rest of everybody else was serving those folks in the other part of the category. That's almost entirely flipped. If you look at the data today, in the United States, we have gotten to the place where now we're only talking about 8 to 9% who are in extreme poverty. Worldwide, we're going there. The world, people who have really tackled this, Jeffrey Sachs wrote a book called The End of Poverty back in 2006, and he talked about the global development goals of going from 30% extreme poverty down into the single digits, and we've done it. We've made huge progress in that, but you would never think it because of how people talk about the world of progress that we've made. And what Pinker talks about is part of the challenge is progress is one, there are some people who think it just happens. And the argument he says is, remember, it does not just happen. It happens because dedicated, committed people put energy and insight and energy into it. And if you actually think that, you don't understand the second law of thermodynamics, which the second law of thermodynamics is entropy. Things fall apart, right? And the only way we make progress is by people leaning in. And then I love a couple of his key quotes where he says, whether or not the world is really getting worse, the nature of news will interact with the nature of cognition to make us think it is. And he talks about the power of the availability heuristic, which is the problem that people estimate the probability of an event or frequency of a kind of thing by the ease with which that instance comes to mind. Which means we think, wow, crime has to be the worst it's ever been because we hear about it all the time. Who knows the FBI crime statistics around violent crime right now? It's probably one of the safest times we've ever had in our country right now, but it doesn't feel that way because of the data we have around us all the time. And so he says we have to make sure we kind of fight that because one of the biggest challenges, he says, nothing is more responsible for the good old days than a bad memory, right? And he talks about this challenge of literally do the thought exercise of outside of today, imagine that you were given the option of randomly appearing in this world, okay, and having a better life. You can't pick your nation, you can't pick your gender, you can't pick your background, and you just randomly show up at any point in the world. You are far more likely to be a servant, a slave, a serf, and to be dead before the age of 40 than anything you're doing today. Right? But again, the challenge is we don't think that way because we don't realize how progress is made. And I bring this up because sometimes when we're looking at the challenges of education, we end up falling into the trap of clickbait catastrophe, right? Where it's headline after headline about how higher education is falling apart and how education is falling apart and how bad things are getting. And in the realization that in the last 200 years, we have made amazing strides in education. Are we there yet? No. But we have absolutely fundamentally moved increasingly from an aristocratic focus of education to a more meritocracy-based, to more and more of a democracy-based version of education. And there is more work to be done, absolutely more work to be done, but we're making progress. And when we look at the challenges of today, what is pretty clear is the last 150 years has been a story of American innovation leaning into access. How do we get more people into education? So we invented public libraries, we invented land-grant institutions, leaned into junior colleges, technical colleges. Out of the 1940s Truman Commission, we created this whole notion of something called a community college, which opened up at one a week in the 60s and 70s thanks to the GI Bill. We massively expanded our access into higher education. But in the last 10 years in particular, especially since 2008, 2009, people have said getting in is not enough. We have to look at not only do they get in, but do they actually get across the stage? Because if you want to, I mean, with the Gates Foundation, I was working at the Gates Foundation, what they discovered after a year-long study of poverty was that the big differentiator was getting a low-income, especially 16 to 26-year-old, some kind of post-secondary credential with labor market value. Now, I want to make sure you take a breath on that. I did not say a 4-year degree for everybody. It's a post-secondary credential with labor market value. That's a family of credentials like certificates, diplomas, associate's degrees, bachelor's, and beyond. The problem is post-secondary credential with labor market value doesn't fit neatly on a bumper sticker, right? So it's hard to get energy around that, but that has been the conversation. The conversation has been this quote-unquote completion agenda, which is how do we get people who start to finish. The problem with the completion agenda is it's easy to game, and the easiest ways to game it are, one, you make your institution more exclusive. You only let in the easiest to serve, and then your grad rates actually go up, which defeats the purpose of more people from more diverse backgrounds being more successful. And the other way, if you really want to help everybody get credentials, is you just lower the standards. Right? And my friend of mine calls it going Oprah. It's like, you get a degree, you get a degree, you get a degree, like everybody gets a degree. Nobody wants that. What we want to be able to do is to, in a more nuanced way, in an effective way, in a tough-minded way, look at what's working and what's not and change the dynamics for students who are on these pathways. And it means we have to look at access, and success is being defined pretty broadly. It has to do with STEM outcomes, especially given the careers that are happening. Whether or not we have on-time completion, whether or not transfer is successful as is, because regional transfer absolutely matters, especially for low-income students. They stay in their regions, and most of them go to at least more to one institution. Things like workforce impact, and also kind of post-graduation outcomes people are looking at. But we're also looking at whether or not we can personalize that student experience so we don't end up with a one-size-fits-all at a time when budgets aren't exactly going up. Anybody having budgets really bursting right now? No, resources are going down, so we're trying to take on these challenges at a time when resources are going down, expectations are going up, and the policy environment is just crazy, right? Let's just be blunt. The policy environment is just crazy. Combined with the changes in technology are just exhausting. I mean, we're just constantly shifting new and different kinds of technology that we're kind of pulling in. And educators are really in this time of almost chaos and crisis where they're saying, how do we chart a course through this to actually make the difference we're going to make? What we're seeing is that people who are doing this well are kind of doing three big things, and we're working with lots of them around the country. We now have about 350 plus institutions that we're working with, and we have data now on about 8 million active students in any given term. And what we've seen in this work is they're really focusing on three big things. I'm just going to give you, I don't have a ton of time, so I'm just going to give you three big buckets of work that based on our data, and we do deep data with these folks, these are the things that seem to be moving the needle. And that kind of give you hope about what's possible for educators on the road ahead. The three are student success intelligence. They're doing work around personalizing pathways and precision engagement. Interestingly, for the educators that deeply care about STEM, what we are seeing is you actually have to use STEM to be able to help them in that process. And that we begin with this whole notion of student success intelligence, which means the willingness to actually use data to change the game. And this is the kind of the basic theory of work. This is the simplest way to think about it, this little basic matrix. Take insight on the y-axis and take change capacity on the x-axis. Low insight is you can basically only do the data work you have to do because of accreditation or reporting for compliance. You do it because you have to do it and you have to get those reports in, right? You're living through that all the time. High insight capacity is deep predictive flow modeling. You can do really advanced work with data, okay? And there's a big range in between. Low change capacity is you don't want to change much anyway, so you're not going to invest any time and energy in making change. And there are some education that don't really want to change much. And then there's high change capacity, right? People who are really trying to do all kinds of different things. The field is actually divided into kind of some big quadrants, and even within institutions you see these divisions. You see some low. You see some people who only do data work because they have to, right? And they don't really want, and they really only do it to justify what they're already doing. And so a friend of mine who's in institutional research, she goes, Mark, we are a data-driven organization. And knowing her and her organization, I'm like, okay, tell me what that means. She goes, what it means is our president makes a decision and he drives me to find data to back up his decision. Like, okay, I get that. But then we have institutions who do really compelling data work, but because they don't have the change capacity, they end up in analysis paralysis. they end up looking at the data and spinning on why it's happening. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And they never get to the point of trying and testing, right? But then the other challenge is really good-hearted educators who are trying. They go to conferences after conferences and they get all kinds of ideas and they end up coming back and implement. Everybody has the 5 things you should do. Do these 4 things that's going to fix your retention problem. Do these things that's going to fix your outcomes problem. Have you heard this? And what happens is we start thinking about best practices. By the way, if you haven't read the book, The End of Average, it is absolutely worth reading. Todd Rose is my favorite high school dropout Harvard professor, where he talks about the problem of averages is we end up taking advice based on everybody that's relevant to no one. Right? And it's the idea that individual institutions are unique and the students within those institutions are unique, and you got to be careful about these one-size-fits-all patterns. What we see in the best practices quadrant is really good-hearted educators who are trying to implement all kinds of things, and they end up with a lot of programs that often aren't at scale, and they have never measured the impact of them, and they end up in initiative fatigue. Are you with me? And it gets to the point where people are like, do not let the president go to another conference. No. We do not want to do any more, right? What we're seeing that's making a difference is this move towards student success intelligence, where they're getting deep data work and they're turning on the lights about their institution, their students, and their patterns. They're using that data to pick their initiatives. Then they're trying things and testing it using data. And here's the biggest one. They're democratizing the data. They're getting the data out to educators and to students so that they can use the data to actually be their own student success scientists. In fact, my favorite name for that upper right-hand quadrant is student success scientists. And it's spreading the wealth on that, right? So the idea that everybody can have those data and be able to actually see the outcomes of their larger work. Okay? Basically, here's the kind of idea. We spent really and I would argue, and Ken, you saw this in our world over the last 30 years, we spent really the 80s and 90s developing systems of record in education, student information systems in particular. And then we spent the late 90s and 2000s building systems of engagement. So everything around the web to LMSs to mobile, all about engaging students. The middle layer is what we need, which is a system of intelligence that actually lets us understand how we can draw data from those different systems and understand and turn on the lights about our students. That's the first thing. And once you get that, you can start doing things. And here's what's important. If you just stop with the data, you end up in that analysis paralysis part. You actually have to start actually innovating and figuring out what's going to work and what's going to not. The 2 biggest areas that we've seen that have moved the needle, especially in the last 5 years, have been work around personalizing pathways. Getting students to understand the pathway they're going to get on, helping them get on the pathway, stay on the pathway, and finish it. And building interesting tools around that. So for example, this is an app called DegreeMap. What DegreeMap does is, in Austin Community College is one of our biggest DegreeMap folks. What DegreeMap does is, we did this ethnography with students and advisors, about a 300-hour ethnography. And one of the things we found is students thinking about their pathway, their biggest problem, you would ask a second-year student or a third-year student, how much longer do you have? And a lot of them had no clue where they were. And so the biggest things they wanted to know is, where am I? What's the next thing I should do? And are there other options I should be considering? And most of them could not answer that question. And so the idea was, could we get data to them that would help them solve that question? So what DegreeMap does is it actually tells them, here's where you are, right? So the wheel of progress, students love seeing where they are. They can click on that and get their full degree plan and how it logs out. In fact, they have a problem, what's called the refresh problem, which means that when grades get turned in, they hit refresh, 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 because they want to see the wheel go up, right? Then they can see minors and everything between it. But the best thing about it is, and you'll see the tiling down below, they put in tiles for every class you should be taking across different semesters, and it basically does the Amazon thing. The vision is to be able to say, a student like you at this stage, here's the next set of courses you should be taking. And the whole idea is to help them avoid toxic course combinations, find synergistic course combinations, and chart that path. Does that make sense? Then, if they ever want to change majors, do students ever want to change majors? Anybody? If they ever want to change majors, this app does this, basically does what no advisor on the planet can do, which is take their total credit accumulation and look at every possible credential at the institution and do a match. And say, if given where you are, here's how far along you'd be in these different majors, and then you can do a side-by-side. Here's where I am, here's where I'd be. Time difference, cost difference, and allows them to make a more rational decision. By the way, when we did this with ACC, when we went back 2 years, we found 600 students who had already earned credentials and didn't know it. Right? By the way, they're not alone. It's because when you have 280-degree programs, no single advisor could do the match on that, right? This is, again, using science to actually help these students chart that larger course. And then if they want to change majors, it's being able to get them to career information that says, if you change majors, here's the job market. Okay, here's the local job market, the state job market, the national job market. Every time we show this to an audience, by the way, across the board, the response is, where was that when I was in college, right? Okay. But what we have found, especially with low-income students and returning students and adult students, is it's not just knowing which courses to take, it's actually being able, and by the way, with great outcomes with Degree Map, we've seen very consistent double-digit gains in persistence with deep persistent score matching on this. We know that getting this information to them works. The most encouraging part of the data is the 19-point bump, which is for the lowest performing students. If you get the most at-risk students and get them the scaffold, this is a scaffold that helps them, right, make better choices. The sister to this, what we found out is it's not just helping them understand the courses, it's actually building their calendar. Because the challenge for many of them is they can't make it fit in their complicated life because they can't just come on Mondays and Wednesdays and Tuesdays and Thursdays between 8 and 3 in the afternoon when most of the courses are being offered. So it's figuring out their complicated lives. So what Scheduler does is a scheduling app is now used by about 2.8 million students around the country. And what it basically does is the students tell you about what their courses they need, and here are the constraints of my life. I have childcare at this time. I've got the ability to get from here to there around this time, and I'm working during these times. It takes your classes you need and the constraints you have and does an optimization match against the calendar and allows you then to build a calendar that makes sense for you. Okay, for working adults, we found this to be a really, really big deal. And then finally, it's the idea of getting them an app, some kind of an application, some kind of a tool that actually allows them to see more information about their progress and the direction they're going to go. What we have seen is personalizing the pathway really matters. So students have an idea of what path they're on, the progress they're making in the path. How many of you have a young person in your life that plays video games? How much time and energy will they put in to go from one level of the game to the next level of the game? Right? They'll forego food, sleep, they'll make friends with people they've never made friends with before, right? Because they want to be able to progress. Part of it's because the folks in the game industry understand the power of maps and they understand the power of feedback. You let people have a clearer map and you give them feedback about the direction they're going to go and good things are going to happen. But it's not just about the pathway, it's also about something called precision engagement, which has to do with the fact that our students, especially first generation and low income students, have complicated lives. And our assumption as educators, we've been using data that's been telling us for a long time that the top issues that students have in succeeding in higher education are academic issues. That's not necessarily the case. In fact, we did a study of about 4 million students from 62 institutions. We basically looked at the students who left in the last year. What we found out is that at 98% of our institutions, they lost more students above 2.0 than below 2.0. And in fact, between 43 and 47% of the students who left in the last year, listen to the statistic, between 43 and 47% of the students were between 3.0 and 4.0 students. They were high-performing students who were doing just fine. Why do you think they're leaving? It's really a combination of life and logistics and psychosocial, right? So they have, like me, I was deep imposter syndrome. I was sure somebody was going to figure out I didn't belong there, right? You've got the psychosocial belongingness, the whole notion of mindset, the whole notion of tenacity and grit, combined with life and logistics. I now have 4 children, which my mom calls a starter family. But my daughter now is at University of Texas at Austin. When she was born, within 2 days, she had a UT Austin onesie on in the crib. Totally scaffolded, ready to go there with every kind of support possible. If her car breaks down, it is not an emergency. It is not. We're going to be there and we're going to help her. If you're a returning adult with 2 kids who's working and doesn't have any other family support and your car breaks down, it's the end of your semester, right? It might be the end of your college career, right? And it's understanding what these are. So one of the things people are doing is they're starting to invest in this idea of nudging. And I love this, using the science of this. Let's identify the students who are high GPA, but their persistence prediction score says that they might be in danger. And so Lone Star College did this, where they actually sent out a targeted nudge to those students. And I just want to kind of go through this nudge because I love how they did this. They identified the students, high performers academically, but the persistence score says they might be in trouble. One, they tested, what they found is this student said, for the love of God, don't text me this stuff. That's weird. I don't want you in my text world. If you're going to text me, it's because there's a fire on campus or I'm really late for something. That's about it, right? They said, send the email, but if you send the email, make sure the subject line tells me this is important, and it should be from somebody that I have some kind of connection to, right? So the subject line's a big deal. We tested a bunch of subject lines for this. The top subject line that works is the "We're proud of you" subject line. You send an email, that has an 85% open rate. I mean, it's to the point where if I want Ron Reed to open up my email, I'm like, Ron, I'm proud of you. Like that email gets opened up, right? But then look at how this message goes. It says, hi, Jane. I wanted to send you a note to see how your semester is going. College can be challenging this time of year. Even the most successful students can struggle. Common challenges include job commitments, family responsibilities, financial pressures, or any combination of these. Do any of these sound familiar to you? If you're experiencing any of these issues or other things, I'm here to help. I'm proud of your progress and excited to support your continued success. Think about what this email does. It says, you're rocking. We're proud of you. 2, these problems are normal. Right? It normalizes the challenge. You've got a support. I'm here to help you. Let me know what I can do. Right? And what was fascinating is the minute they sent this note out, they got flooded with responses back. And it turned out to be childcare issues, financial aid issues, a host of different challenges. But these students are eminently savable. And you know what's interesting about this insight is we've known for a long time, when you study, for example, developmental education students who are academically challenged, people who work with them find out, it's not just the academics. They actually have psychosocial problems and life and logistics problems. Guess who else has psychosocial and life and logistic problems? All students of all different kinds of backgrounds. And part of it's understanding how you can identify that and reach out and provide some kind of support. Does that make sense? But the thing I love about this is they tried it and they tested it. By the way, this campaign has a double-digit boost in persistence. It goes anywhere from 10 to 15-point bump just by connecting and saying, hey, I'm here, you're doing great, your problems are normal, let me know how I can help you solve them and help you get over it. But I love the notion of being able to do more precision engagement with these students. We've been using this tool called Impact, and what Impact does is it kind of basically does a statistically created RCT. It creates what's called prediction-based persistence score matching, which means for any initiative, you can create a control group, so you get rid of the selection bias we get with a lot of our outreach initiatives. And we've now tested close to 1,000 student success initiatives over the last year and a half. And one of the things that's pretty consistent is there's lots of things that are working. But what we see is that they sometimes have to be tuned because there's kind of an emerging 60-40 rule. And again, this is using science to figure out how we can support these students more precisely. So what we see in the 60-40 rule is basically this. About 60% of the initiatives we're running to help support students are working, but they can be refined. You actually see that you can get the lift differently. About 4% of them are negative. They're actually hurting students. And about 36% of them are just kind of muddling, right? And just give you an example, a lot of early warning systems, I have to give you an early warning about early warning systems. Okay, because what we've seen is some early warning systems have a great impact. Some early warning systems for students are deadly, right? If you're a returning woman with kids and you go back to school at the beginning of September, your 3 kids go back into school as you're working and taking 12 hours at school. What happens when your kids go back to school in September? They often get sick. All the moms, they know exactly, they get sick. This is a true story. A woman told me basically 2 of her kids got the flu. So by the 3rd week in September, she was heads down with stuff throwing up all over the place. Her work had a big project she got behind in. She ended up missing 3 classes over the course of 2 weeks. She was then, once she kind of got the kids back and healthy, back in school, she wanted to get back online. But she got an email from the school that said, this email is to inform you your school has a 4-class absence policy. You have missed 3 classes. If you miss 1 more, you will be dropped. What was her response? She left. She was like, fine, okay. And she literally said this is what breaks my heart. She said, I just kind of took it as a sign from God that I wasn't supposed to be going that semester. And it's like, oh man. It's like, we've got to give different kinds of signs, folks. We got to think about how we can help them signal a very different kind of direction. But if you change the messaging of that says, hey, I know you've missed some courses, you can get back on track, be sure to connect with me and let's figure out how we can help you finish out the semester strong. That's a different message, right? But it's the idea of us thinking about the messaging that's going to students. By the way, we've now started doing these meta-analysis of the core messages going to students. The vast majority of messages we're sending to students are contractual, legalistic, transactional. They are not supporting of their journeys on that path. They're not giving them precision engagement. The idea here, folks, is that we have the opportunity now to leverage the kind of things we're talking about, to leverage better intelligence than ever before, to personalize that pathway for students and actually get more precise with the engagement. If we want to improve STEM education, we got to use STEM, right? We actually have to start using the science of student success to figure out how we can help folks. And just to kind of bring this home, I was doing a presentation at Scottsdale Community College 3-4 weeks ago. And I come from the Valley of the Sun. I've got 2 degrees from Arizona State. I know what happens, it was in August, in the Valley of the Sun, it's a thing called monsoons, right? So I get there the night before. I travel 200,000 miles a year. I love when I get into cities to do urban hikes. So I'd mapped out kind of an urban hike to get at least 2-3 miles of steps in. I was going to pick up some food at a restaurant. I'd actually ordered it. I was going to pick up the food on my way back and walk it back to my hotel. Mapped out my hike, went out, started going. 15 minutes into the hike, my phone explodes. I'm not kidding. Every alert in the world starts going off on my phone. And these are the actual alerts. And I kind of stop and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, well, it must be a dust storm. And I literally turned around. And when I turned around, if you've been in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, and you've seen the dust storms, you see it in the distance, a black wall of dust coming in. And I start doing the math in my head. Okay, this walk is probably going to take at least 45 minutes for me to get to where the restaurant is. I'm then going to pick up the food, and then I'm going to try to walk back to the hotel. I'm like, this isn't going to work. I'm going to be in the middle of that storm. Let's just go back to the hotel now, get in my car. I'll drive and get the food and get back. And at least I'll be in the car if the storm hits. So I walk back to the hotel as fast as I can. I was signaled. I was told there might be a problem. I got back to the hotel, and as I'm getting back into the hotel, there's a couple that's about to leave the hotel. And the valet person out front is begging them not to leave. Do not walk out into downtown Tempe. Now is not a good time. And they go, oh, this is no big deal. We come from Florida. We're used to big storms. It's not a big thing. And they just walk off. And in that moment, the valet kind of looks at them and then looks at me, and we look at each other. We're like, oh man, about what they're going to walk into. Well, anyway, I went and got in my car, and I drove over to my the pizza place I was going to, Oregano's. And as I'm getting out, literally things are flying in all directions. The wind's really picked up. I get out of the car. People are rushing off the patio because the storm's just starting to hit. I get into the restaurant, grab my food, get back out to my car. And as I get back into my car, that pelting rain starts hitting, like full blast. And I get in the car and start driving back down towards downtown Tempe. And I turn left, for those of you who know the area, I'm on University Boulevard, about to go up Mill. I go up Mill, and I see a scene I have not seen since Gilligan's Island reruns, where the wind is blowing like, it just seems like 100 miles an hour, and that same couple, the guy is holding onto a palm tree and just being blown backwards by the wind. And his wife is holding on to him. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I got to turn around and go see if I can help these guys. And the wind's blowing like crazy, and they finally let go, and they dive into a vape shop that's in downtown. I'm pretty sure they weren't going to the vape shop, right? So I knew they were safe. But I got back to my hotel, and I just thought, what a wonderful metaphor that is, because if it wasn't for 2 science students, okay, back in the 1950s, who violated their professor's maxim and stayed and watched radar and figured out the echo hook pattern for what was happening with hurricanes, we would not have the weather detection systems we have right now that actually tell us about severe storms. And they've estimated that that innovation has probably saved millions of lives, millions. Because now, instead of we now have sometimes 14 minutes all the way up to 2 days worth of warning to get ready for these storms, whereas before we had sometimes 30 seconds, right, before the storms got on top of us. So it's the idea of signaling before the storm hits. I'm going to tell you that many of our students, especially first-generation low-income students, they have storms coming their way. And there are signals that tell us the storms are coming their way. I'm about to go right now. I leave for the opening of the Hope Center for College Community and Justice, which is launching at Temple University. It's the next iteration of the Hope Lab, which was in Wisconsin. And they're studying food insecurity, housing insecurity. 1 out of 10 students in higher ed is homeless. 30% are food insecure. All kinds of transportation issues, childcare issues. If we want more and more diverse students to be successful, especially if we want to get them successful on STEM pathways, we got to use STEM to help them be successful, because that's going to get them on the pathway to possibility. Thanks, folks.